I heard my daughter scream, a sound so raw, so guttural, it froze the blood in my veins. I dropped the laundry basket, socks spilling across the hardwood, and ran toward the front door. The scream had come from outside, near the garden bed we'd just started digging together that morning. My heart slammed against my chest. When I yanked the door open, the sun hit my face, but what I saw made everything go dark. Lila was on the ground, her little body twisted unnaturally next to the newly planted petunias. Her wheelchair was overturned, one wheel still spinning. Hovering above her was her, Mrs. Cartwright, our HOA president, her silver hair frizzing out from under her wide-brimmed sun hat, and in her trembling hands, a shovel. She was breathing heavily, eyes wide like she'd just seen a ghost or become one. The metal blade of the shovel glistened under the afternoon sun, and I saw it, a smear of red across the edge. Blood. My daughter's blood. I couldn't breathe. Lila. I screamed, my voice breaking as I stumbled down the porch steps. What did you do? I shrieked at Cartwright, but she didn't respond. She took a shaky step back, muttering something about violations and unauthorized landscaping. She looked almost possessed. As I dropped to my knees beside Lila, my hands shaking uncontrollably, I realized she was conscious, barely. Her lip was split, a deep gash over her eyebrow, pouring blood onto the soil she had so lovingly planted just this morning. Her fragile hand reached for me, whispering, "Mom." I was too stunned to cry, too furious to scream. I looked up again, and Cartwright was gone. Like a shadow, she'd vanished behind the hedges bordering her pristine lawn. I scooped Lila into my arms, red and soil staining my clothes, and screamed for someone, anyone, to help. A few neighbors had begun to gather, peering from behind curtains and porch rails, but no one moved. No one spoke. Just one figure, Mr. Elliot from across the street, hurried toward us with his phone already out, shouting that he was calling 911. The garden, the flowers, the colors my daughter picked so carefully, they were all trampled, stained with dirt, blood, and silence. It wasn't just a flower bed now. It was a crime scene. And then, in the quiet that followed the sirens in the distance, I noticed the HOA letter still pinned to our mailbox, flapping in the breeze like a threat that had just come to life. We weren't supposed to be here. Not in this town, not on this street, not in this quiet little cul-de-sac where people trimmed their hedges at exactly 9 a.m. and waved like they didn't really mean it. But life doesn't care about plans, and grief doesn't care about timing. After my husband died in a highway collision 3 years ago, it was just me and Lila. She was only 9 when it happened. The accident didn't kill her body, but it took her legs. A crushed spine, they said. T7 vertebrae. Irreversible. The hospital stay was long, expensive, and gut-wrenching. The house we lived in back then became impossible. Too many stairs, too many memories, and no ramp in sight. So I sold it, liquidated everything, and started over. I didn't want to raise her in chaos. I wanted stillness. I wanted structure. And this sleepy Oregon suburb, Lakeview Hollow, offered exactly that. The real estate agent was all smiles when she showed us the beige, one-story cottage on the corner of Sycamore Lane. ADA compliant, she said proudly, and just across from the park. Lila loved it immediately, especially the large patch of unclaimed soil near the mailbox. "Mom," she said wide-eyed, "we could grow sunflowers." It felt like a promise. A fragile, beautiful promise. And I held on to it with both hands. I should have asked more questions about the neighborhood, about the HOA. But I was tired, emotionally bankrupt, running on fumes. The home inspection cleared, the papers were signed, and by March we were moving in. I was still unpacking boxes when she showed up. Her name was Margaret Cartwright, though everyone on the street, with a strange mixture of fear and respect, simply called her Mrs. Cartwright. She arrived precisely 47 minutes after the moving truck left, knocked exactly 3 times on our door. When I opened it, I was greeted by a smile, so tight it looked like it hurt. "Welcome to Lakeview Hollow," she said, thrusting a printed pamphlet into my hands. It was the HOA Code of Conduct, printed in color and laminated. We like to keep things orderly around here. I nodded politely, but my stomach turned. The first few weeks passed with mild awkwardness. Lila started physical therapy downtown. I took a remote nursing job to stay close to home. Our neighbor, Mr. Elliot, a retired librarian, waved to us every morning from his porch swing. Lila loved him. He told her stories about wild birds and faraway libraries, and once gave her a painted rock shaped like a turtle. She kept it on her windowsill. We tried to settle in. I put up wind chimes. Lila drew chalk flowers on the sidewalk. On weekends, I wheeled her to the park. She smiled more. I smiled more. For the first time in years, we began to breathe. And then the first letter arrived, folded in half and taped to our mailbox. Violation number 12, unauthorized exterior decoration. It referred to the wind chimes. Disrupts uniform auditory aesthetics, it claimed. No signature, just a printed Lakeview Hollow HOA. I took them down. Then came a note about our welcome mat, too colorful. Our garbage bins, visible for 12 minutes past collection time. Our yard edge, not conforming to community landscaping geometry. It was madness. Lila was confused. Don't they like colors here? I didn't know what to say. Then one day, she said something I'll never forget. I want to make it better, she whispered, eyes sparkling. What if we grow flowers? Real ones. In the dirt. Like therapy? Her physical therapist had encouraged gardening to help with hand coordination and emotional healing. I was hesitant. We already had warnings for less. But then I looked at her. My daughter, stuck in a chair she never asked for, trying to give something beautiful to the world. I bought seeds the next morning. Petunias, daisies, snapdragons, a mix of bold purples, soft blues, and hopeful yellows. Lila spent hours sketching the layout in her notebook. She measured with a ruler. She named the plants before they were even planted. That patch of soil near the mailbox became her world, her safe space, her project, her declaration of life. The day we broke ground, it felt sacred. She wore her sun hat and gloves, and I knelt beside her, breaking up the dry earth. Mr. Elliot stopped by with a watering can and a smile. Looks lovely, kiddo, he said gently. You're doing the neighborhood proud. But not everyone agreed. 2 hours later, we heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Mrs. Cartwright stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Excuse me, she said sharply. That space is not designated for private alteration. It's a garden, I said, wiping my forehead. A healing project for my daughter. It's against regulation. Mailbox zones are HOA-governed property. I stood up slowly. It's not hurting anyone. She tilted her head. That's not for you to decide. Lila looked up at her, smiling, unaware of the venom behind those eyes. We're planting sunflowers too. Mrs. Cartwright didn't respond. She turned and walked away, but her words lingered in the air like poison. I'll be filing an incident report. That night, Lila made plant markers out of popsicle sticks. She couldn't stop smiling. I couldn't stop worrying. The first thing to disappear was the painted turtle rock. Lila noticed it the next morning when she wheeled herself out to check on the seedlings. Mom, it's gone, she called. I stepped outside, wiping my hands on a towel, and saw the empty spot on the edge of the bed. The dirt was slightly disturbed, like someone had kicked it. Maybe the wind knocked it off? I offered, but we both knew it wasn't the wind. It hadn't even rained. I walked over and checked the bushes near the curb. Nothing. That evening, a typed letter was folded into our mailbox again. Subject, warning notice. Details, unauthorized decorative item removed by HOA compliance to maintain uniformity. Reminder, homeowners are advised to review section 3.2, visual consistency of exterior features. I crumpled it in my hand and tried to smile for Lila. It's okay. Let's make a new one. She made 2 that night. 2 days later, we came home from therapy and saw the garden cordoned off with bright yellow rope and a tiny white stake in the ground. A printed sign hung from it, pending review. HOA violation, underassessment. It was absurd. The garden barely took up 4 square feet. Just a semicircle near the mailbox with freshly sprouting green shoots. But the sign made it look like we dumped a hazardous waste drum on public land. Mrs. Cartwright stood nearby with a clipboard, inspecting it like she was conducting a military audit. I approached, calm but firm. What exactly are you assessing? She didn't even look at me. Soil drainage, curb alignment, potential disruption to root systems under pavement. This is potting soil, I said, and the only roots are the ones my daughter planted. Your daughter, she said, enunciating the word with unsettling stress, is not an HOA member. She's a human being. Cartwright finally looked up. This is a community, not a place for individual exceptions. Lila rolled forward. They're just flowers. She'll remove them by tomorrow, Cartwright said, turning away. Or we will. The next morning, we found half the garden stumped. The markers were broken, the soil churned, and the rope trampled in muddy circles. A few sprouts had been yanked out entirely. Lila was silent. She just stared. That night, she cried herself to sleep. I called the police. They came, took photos, nodded, said they'd file a report. But it wasn't a criminal matter, they explained. It was a civil conflict within HOA jurisdiction. I felt powerless. Mr. Elliot brought over tea and sat with us on the porch. She's done this before, he said quietly. A family with wind spinners. A single father who hung up string lights. They didn't last long. What happened to them? I asked. They moved. I looked at my daughter inside the house, trying to glue her broken plant markers together. We're not moving, I said. From then on, Mrs. Cartwright made her presence known daily. She would walk past our house 3, sometimes 4 times a day, clipboard, always in hand, a camera slung around her neck. She'd stop, take pictures of our porch, the flower bed, the mailbox. Once, I caught her snapping photos of Lila from the sidewalk. You take one more photo of my child, and I will file a harassment claim, I shouted. She didn't reply, just smiled and turned the lens away. But the damage was done. Lila started staying inside. She didn't want to be in trouble. She asked if the garden was bad. She started drawing less, talking less, smiling less. It broke me. So I built a small wooden border for the garden. Nothing fancy, just some reclaimed wood, sealed and smoothed. I even called the city and confirmed the garden didn't violate any sidewalk ordinance. It was clear, legal, harmless. The next morning, we found paint splattered across the boards. White, thick, dripping, like someone had dumped an entire bucket from above. Another note arrived the same day. Section 5.1, Unauthorized Modifications to Shared Landscape Zones. I started documenting everything. I bought a motion sensor camera and installed it discreetly near the porch. Each time Cartwright passed, it recorded her pacing, lingering, sometimes even muttering. In one clip, she reached down and touched the soil with the tip of her shoe, like she was measuring something invisible. But she was smart, never caught doing damage, always left just enough space between her actions and the consequence. And the HOA backed her every step of the way. Then came the meeting. Cartwright hand-delivered the invitation, like it was a royal summons. Lakeview Hollow HOA, quarterly meeting attendance requested, Amelia Barnes location. Community Center Hall, be topic, repeated violations, and potential fines. I brought the footage. I brought printed documentation. I brought Lila's drawings of the garden. They didn't care. Cartwright stood at the podium like a politician, listing our violations in bullet points. Improper soil drainage, aesthetic disharmony, disruption of visual flow. One board member asked if the paint we used on the border was certified weather-resistant. Another suggested I consider a compliant potted plant program instead. I stood and said, my daughter is disabled. This is her therapy. You are destroying her joy. Someone coughed. Cartwright smiled. We're not destroying anything. We're preserving harmony. The room voted. 6-1. Motion passed. Fine, $300. Removal deadline, 5 days. That night, Lila asked, what if I write them a letter? I hesitated. What would it say? She thought for a moment, then said softly that the garden makes me feel strong and alive. I kissed her forehead. Then let's write it together. She poured her heart into it, drew flowers on the border, signed it with glitter ink. We delivered it to each board member's mailbox. Not one responded. That weekend, something shifted. Cartwright stopped smiling. She no longer carried a clipboard, just a shovel. She stood at the edge of the garden each morning now, as if waiting for something, watching, breathing heavier than usual, her hat pulled lower, her steps more erratic. It was like the rules didn't matter to her anymore, because she had become the rule. I told Lila not to go out without me. But the next day, while I was finishing a Zoom call in the kitchen, she rolled out with her gloves on, cradling a small marigold in her hands. And Mrs. Cartwright was waiting. For the first time in weeks, Lila laughed. It was the kind of laugh I hadn't heard since the accident, that bright, open-throated joy that made you believe everything might be okay. She had just finished replanting one of the damaged beds, carefully tucking the roots into the soil with her gloved fingers. "This one's name is Melody," she said proudly, pointing to a tiny blue salvia, "because she sings when the wind hits her." Mr. Elliot clapped from his porch. "Looks like she's winning," he called out with a smile. It felt like a win. We'd reinforced the border with better materials, all within HOA guidelines. I filed an official complaint with the city, and although they didn't intervene, they agreed that the garden technically didn't violate public codes. I even found a local gardening therapy program willing to send a volunteer to speak at the next HOA meeting on Lila's behalf. We weren't giving up. Not this time. For a moment, peace returned. Neighbors who'd kept their distance began to soften. A woman named Judy from 2 doors down dropped off homemade cookies and whispered, "Not all of us are like her." A teenage boy who skateboarded past every day started waving to Lila. Even the mailman paused once to say, "Looks beautiful, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Lila beamed with pride, and every day she added something small: a colored rock, a bamboo stick with a hand-drawn label, a short poem she wrote about sunlight. "I think the garden is working," she whispered to me one night. "I think it's making people nicer." I kissed her cheek. "I think it's making them see you." But underneath that growing warmth, I felt it, the pressure building again. 3 days later, a city inspector showed up. Routine sidewalk compliance, he said. He measured the distance from the garden edge to the curb, checked for obstructions, took pictures. When I asked who sent him, he didn't answer, just handed me a duplicate of the report and left. At the bottom of the form in small print was a single typed comment: "Concerns submitted by Lakeview Hollow HOA." I knew it was her. That night, I installed a second camera. Not just for evidence, for protection. The next morning, something new appeared. Not on our porch, not on the mailbox, but on Lila's garden. A small wooden stake with a laminated card stapled to it. On the card, "This feature is pending removal due to non-compliance. Violators may be subject to fines or penalties." Lakeview Hollow HOA. Lila saw it before I did. She didn't say a word. She just stared at it. Her face went blank. Then she turned her chair around and went back inside. She didn't ask to go out the next day, or the day after. On Sunday, I found her tearing up drawings at her desk. "Hey," I said softly, "what are you doing?" "They don't care," she muttered. "They hate the garden. They hate me." "No, baby," I said, kneeling beside her. "They don't hate you. One bitter woman doesn't get to decide who you are, but she does," Lila said. "Everyone listens to her. Even the HOA. Even the police." I couldn't argue, because she wasn't wrong. But then, a surprise. A letter arrived, handwritten, slipped under our door. It read, "To Lila, I'm sorry about what happened to your flowers. They're beautiful. You are brave." A friend, it wasn't signed, but it gave her hope. She taped it next to her bed. The next morning, she put on her gloves again. "I want to finish it," she said, "before they try to ruin it again." We spent the entire afternoon in the garden, planting, painting, singing along to old songs playing from my phone. Lila told me she wanted to add a bench someday, so other people could sit and smile when they walked by. When we went inside that night, she was tired but glowing. I tucked her into bed. She whispered, "Don't let them take it, Mom." I won't, I promised. Not ever. But promises mean nothing when evil doesn't sleep. At 2:13 a.m., my phone pinged. Motion alert. I checked the camera feed, and I saw her. Cartwright. She wasn't in her usual beige slacks and sun hat. She wore black, hoodie pulled tight, gloves, and in her hand, a can of something, spray paint. I bolted from the bed, threw on a coat, and ran outside. She was already gone. But the word she left behind wasn't. Sprayed across the small wooden fence in harsh red letters, "Remove it or else." I filed another report. The officer sighed. "We'll add it to the record." No one came to clean it, so I did it myself. Lila never saw the words. I didn't let her. 2 days later, she said she wanted to plant one more flower, just one. She called it the Bravery Bloom. She'd saved it, hidden it, waiting for the right time. "I want it right in the middle," she said. "So even if they rip out everything else, this one stays." I smiled through tears. "Let's do it." But I had a Zoom meeting scheduled, just 30 minutes. I told her to wait, but she was determined. "I'll only be out front," she said. 5 minutes. I hesitated. I shouldn't have, but I let her go. And Cartwright was already waiting. It was supposed to be just 5 minutes. I had a virtual staff meeting that morning. I work as a remote nurse coordinator for a nonprofit, mostly paperwork and scheduling, but the meeting couldn't be missed. Quarterly reporting. Lila had asked so sweetly, "Mom, can I just go out and plant it? I'll be quick." She held the tiny flower like it was a fragile treasure. A bright orange lily, freshly wrapped in wet paper towel, ready to bloom. I looked at the clock, 10:01 a.m. "Okay," I said carefully, but just in the front bed, "and call me if you see her." Lila gave a salute, grinning. I, Captain Mom. That would be the last time I saw her smile that day. From the window, I watched her wheel down the ramp, holding her gardening kit in her lap. She positioned herself next to the mailbox, where the soil had already been softened. She talked to the plant, as she always did, narrating every movement like she was in a documentary. I saw her remove the trowel, dip it gently into the dirt, then press her hands down, flattening the space. Then she looked up suddenly and froze. I sat up straighter in my chair. Standing at the edge of the curb, right across from the bed, was Mrs. Cartwright. No clipboard this time, no pamphlet, just a cold stare. Her arms were crossed, and she was wearing black gardening gloves, the kind meant for heavy work, not inspection strolls. Lila said something, but I couldn't hear it. Cartwright stepped forward. Slowly. I tapped the mute button on my meeting. My pulse picked up. I got out of my seat. Cartwright was speaking now, her mouth moving quickly. Lila looked alarmed, then shook her head and started backing her chair up. Cartwright stepped closer. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. This wasn't a warning. This was escalation. I sprinted toward the front door. When I opened it, I heard the tail end of her words. "Warned you people." And then she reached for something lying in the tall grass nearby. It was a shovel. Not just any garden trowel, a full-sized, steel-handled landscaping shovel. I stopped cold on the porch. Lila let out a startled cry. "Don't you touch her." I screamed, leaping off the steps. But Cartwright raised the shovel high, not even above Lila's head, but toward the soil. She drove it into the garden bed with a growl. The force of the blow threw soil into Lila's lap. "Stop it." Lila sobbed. "You're hurting them." Cartwright lifted the shovel again and slammed it down. "This is not your property." I ran as fast as I could, but I wasn't fast enough. The next swing hit something harder. Lila's hand. She let out a piercing scream and jerked backward. The chair toppled, one will catching in the dirt. I lunged, caught her midfall. Cartwright dropped the shovel. Her face blank. No fear. No guilt. Just cold certainty. Then she turned and walked away. I screamed for help. Neighbors began pouring out. Mr. Elliott ran across the street. Someone called the police. Someone else started filming. I cradled Lila in my arms, blood from her scraped palm mixing with the soil. "Hang on, baby. Hang on." She couldn't stop crying. She hit me, Mom. She hit my hand. Her fingers were trembling. Her wrist had already started to swell. The ambulance arrived in 5 minutes. The police, 7. Cartwright wasn't home when they knocked. Gone. Just like that. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed a hairline fracture in her wrist and multiple contusions. Could have been worse, he said. A direct blow to the head. I couldn't hear the rest, because all I could see was that damn shovel and the word people echoing in my ears. Back home, the garden was destroyed. Every flower was crushed, uprooted, or buried under displaced soil. The signpost was snapped in 2. The wooden border kicked in, one end torn loose. Someone had clearly tried to make it look like a cleanup attempt. But I knew better. It was erasure, not just of the garden, but of what it represented, of Lila's hope, of our place in this neighborhood. And then, as I prepared to take the footage from my porch camera to the police, I found the letter, taped to our door. White paper, printed text, no name. Your child doesn't belong in this community. You don't either. Leave, before something worse happens. My hand shook. I dropped the letter and looked at Lila, asleep on the couch, wrist in a sling, cheeks tear-stained. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just bullying, this was war. And the HOA? They said nothing. No apology. No investigation. No condemnation. Just another notice. Violation. Altercation at Community Green Zone. Pending review. I didn't sleep that night. While Lila rested, her wrist in a sling and a faint bruise under her eye from the fall, I sat at the dining table with a flash drive full of video footage and an emergency contact list pulled up on my laptop. The police report from the hospital had been logged as disputed injury in civil matter. Disputed. I watched the footage over and over, Cartwright raising the shovel, the impact, Lila's scream, her falling. And yet somehow it wasn't enough. They said, it's unclear if it was intentional. I said, she hit a disabled child with a shovel. They shrugged. She claims she was removing a violation, not attacking. And there was again the shield of policy, of rules, of loopholes, so wide that monsters could walk through them with a smile. But the video spread. Mr. Elliott shared it online. He had uploaded it to his YouTube channel with the title, HOA President Attacks Disabled Girl Over Flowers. It exploded overnight. Facebook, Reddit, TikTok. People across the country saw what our neighbors had ignored for months. Evil. Sociopath. How is she not in jail? The internet was furious. And that's when the media arrived. Local news crews were parked outside by morning. I refused to speak at first. I wanted to protect Lila. But when the footage played on the morning news and Cartwright's face was blurred while my daughter's screams echoed unredacted, I lost it. I called the station myself. 2 days later, we did the interview. Lila wore her favorite hoodie and held my hand the whole time. I sat beside her on the couch, jaw clenched, fighting back tears. The reporter asked questions gently. How do you feel knowing your neighbor did this? Lila's voice was barely a whisper. I thought she just didn't like flowers. That clip made national TV. And then the calls came in. Disability advocates, civil rights attorneys, therapy programs. Even a congresswoman's office issued a public statement of support. A GoFundMe created by a stranger reached $38,000 in less than 48 hours. Suddenly, Cartwright wasn't just a neighborhood tyrant. She was a symbol of the very worst kind of power, petty cruelty protected by policy. Still, the HOA said nothing until the emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but I went. I stood at the back of the crowded room while Cartwright stood behind a podium, arms folded, face stony. Her husband, a pale, wiry man with watery eyes, stood beside her. The footage, she said, has been manipulated. Gasps. She continued. The child's presence on HOA-governed property was unauthorized. I was conducting necessary landscaping corrections when the unfortunate incident occurred. I deeply regret that she fell, but that was enough. I stepped forward. You regret that she fell? You swung a shovel at her. We have it on camera. The room fell silent. She blinked, for the first time, visibly rattled. "You're not a member of this meeting. I'm a mother." A few people in the crowd applauded. That night, someone egged our porch. The next morning, our mailbox was smashed in. But I didn't cry. I called my lawyer, and I filed charges. At the courthouse 2 days later, the restraining order was issued. Mrs. Cartwright was now legally barred from coming within 100 feet of our property or my daughter. The officer who delivered it to her said she didn't flinch, just signed the papers with shaking hands. But there was something else in her eyes now. Not power, fear. Lila watched the entire hearing on a live feed from home. When the judge declared, "The court acknowledges this incident as an act of physical aggression against a minor with a disability," she clapped quietly. "Do you think they'll take away her shovel?" she asked. I smiled despite myself. "They'll take a lot more than that." That night, we planted one flower. Just one. Right in the center of the destroyed bed. A single red tulip. And a sign beside it, drawn by Lila in big, careful letters, "Still growing." It rained the next morning. Not a light drizzle, a cleansing downpour that soaked the sidewalks and washed away what remained of the chalk lines around the flower bed. The smashed stems turned to mush, and the soil puddled into dark pools. But in the center, barely holding its petals, the tulip stood. Lila watched it from the window, her wrist still in a sling, her hair tucked under a beanie. "It's still there," she said quietly. "It didn't give up." I leaned in beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Just like you." The restraining order didn't stop Cartwright from trying. She didn't step foot near us again, not physically, but her voice lingered. Her letters kept coming, now through official HOA envelopes. One arrived just 2 days after the court hearing. Notice: disruption of community peace by household residents. Next board session will evaluate potential termination of residential privileges under Clause 14. They were threatening to evict us. For being attacked, I brought the letter to the police. Detective Mallory, who had just been assigned to the case after media attention surged, read it slowly and frowned. "This isn't an eviction notice. It's harassment, wrapped in HOA, letterhead. Then why isn't she in jail?" I snapped. He sighed. "She's claiming self-defense." Claims she was startled, that the shovel hit the girl accidentally, without direct audio and with no witnesses within 5 feet. "We have video," I said. "I know, but she's well-connected. Ex-judge's daughter. HOA president 10 years. Clean record. She's not going to walk away untouched. But it's going to take time. Time. It's always time when it's your child in pain. But when it's a woman like Cartwright, she gets silence. Excuses. Patience. Lila stayed home for 10 days. The therapist said her anxiety had resurfaced, her confidence shattered. She's exhibiting trauma response symptoms, shame, hypervigilance, disassociation. Translation: she was scared to go outside. She flinched at the sound of shovels. Even garden tools made her eyes widen. But she refused to let go of the garden. She sat by the window and sketched plans every evening, new layouts, protective barriers, benches shaped like butterflies. And she wrote a letter to the entire neighborhood. We printed 42 copies. On bright yellow paper with big bold letters at the top. "My name is Lila. This is my garden." She wrote about her therapy, about the accident that left her in a wheelchair, about the peace she felt with flowers and dirt. She never mentioned Cartwright by name, but she didn't have to. She signed it "Still Growing." We left one on every porch. By Friday, something changed. A small basket appeared on our doorstep. Inside, seed packets, a handwritten card, and a drawing from a neighbor child of Lila sitting beside a giant sunflower with a superhero cape. Then another gift arrived, a bag of compost with a note that read, "For the garden that fights back." A family 2 houses down offered to help rebuild the flower bed, and then Judy, the quiet widow with 3 cats, called and asked, "Can I walk Lila down to the park tomorrow? I promise I'll bring cookies." We said yes. That was the beginning. Meanwhile, the investigation turned. A former HOA board member, an older man named Harold Green, came forward. He claimed Cartwright had a history of using HOA policies to target homeowners she didn't like the look of. He submitted emails, records of complaints she filed against single parents, disabled residents, renters, and even immigrants. One email read, "It's about maintaining our kind of community." The media ate it up. So did the prosecutors. They upgraded her charge to assault with a deadly weapon against a minor with disability, a felony. The court date was set. Local news covered it like a drama series. Cameras outside the courthouse. Protesters with signs that read, "Let her garden," and "Cartwright must go." People across the country mailed flowers to our house. Some were real. Others were crocheted or painted. One man from Florida sent a handmade wooden sign that said, "Keep growing, Lila." We nailed it to the fence. Then, the moment no one expected, the HOA board voted, and Cartwright was removed as president, officially, permanently. The motion passed 5-2 after a heated session. Her husband resigned 2 hours later. It didn't fix everything, but it was a shift, a crack in the walls she'd built around herself for years. The next morning, I found Lila sitting outside, her chair angled toward the tulip. A new flower had begun to bloom beside it. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she looked at me and whispered, "Can we make it bigger?" And I said the only thing that made sense. Yes. We thought it was over. With Cartwright removed from her post, the felony charge pending, and the community finally behind us, it felt like we could breathe again. Lila was laughing more. The garden was reborn, even bigger than before. Neighbors brought wheelbarrows, planted lavender and marigolds. A small white bench appeared one morning with a plaque that read, "Lila's Corner, where things bloom against all odds." I'd never seen her smile. So wide. Then the letter came. It arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address. Just one sheet of paper inside. Typed, "To whom it may concern, as of the upcoming HOA board transition, new proposals are under consideration regarding the use of community visual spaces. Some board members have expressed concerns regarding excessive personalization and memorial-style features. The garden near your property may be subject to reevaluation and removal. Sincerely, Lakeview Hollow HOA, Transitional Board Review Committee, no names. No signatures, just a threat, disguised as policy." I felt my knees go weak. They were coming for the garden, again. But Cartwright was gone. Who was behind this now? I made calls, sent emails. The new board chair, a nervous middle-aged man named Brian Keller, finally responded after 4 days. His voice trembled on the phone. "It's not personal, Ms. Barnes. It's just some residents think the attention has made the neighborhood look unstable." Unstable. I snapped. My daughter was assaulted. She bled on that soil. That garden is her healing. "I understand," he mumbled, "but legally, the garden occupies HOA-monitored space. There was no problem with that space for 10 years. I said, until my daughter used it." He was silent. Then, in a lower tone, "They're scared. They think your case will attract lawsuits, audits. You're a liability now." And there it was. We weren't neighbors. We were headlines. And that terrified them more than the woman who attacked a child with a shovel. I hung up. Lila was sitting on the bench, braiding flower stems together. I didn't tell her. Not yet. That night, I got a call from Mr. Elliott. "You need to know," he said, "they're circulating a petition to ban personal gardens on common ground permanently." How many signatures? Too many. I looked out the window. It was happening again. But this time, they weren't using shovels. They were using fear, bureaucracy, silence. So I made a choice. I called the reporter who first interviewed us and told her everything. The new letter, the cowardly calls, the return of the same hatred in a newer, softer voice. The next day, the story ran, "After attack, HOA tries again to destroy disabled girls' garden. Public outrage returned like wildfire." But this time, it wasn't just support, it was fury. Lila's story went viral again, this time with national disability advocacy groups, civil rights organizations, and even legal nonprofits jumping in. And one message kept repeating, "This isn't about flowers. This is about power." I didn't cry this time. When the letter came, when the board backpedaled, when whispers returned to porches and fingers pointed from driveways, I didn't cry. Because this time I was ready to fight. Not just for Lila's garden, but for every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong in their own home. I filed a civil suit, not just against Cartwright, but against the HOA itself. Negligence, harassment, failure to protect a vulnerable resident. And thanks to a viral campaign that had now reached over 12 million views, I had legal backing from 2 national advocacy organizations and an attorney willing to represent us pro bono. We held a press conference on the steps of City Hall. The crowd was small, but the cameras were not. Lila sat beside me, her sling finally off, her fingers gently holding a sunflower. I stepped to the mic. My daughter didn't ask to be in a wheelchair. She didn't choose pain, but she did choose something that made her feel strong again, a garden, a handful of flowers by a mailbox. I paused, and for that, she was humiliated, threatened, and assaulted. And the very people responsible for protecting this community chose to protect themselves instead. I looked directly into the lens. We're not leaving. We're not backing down. And if you try to uproot my daughter's garden again, you better be ready to uproot every voice that now stands with her. The crowd erupted in cheers. Lila smiled at me like I was a superhero. That same day, a new city council member offered to sponsor a bill prohibiting HOAs from interfering with therapy gardens used by disabled residents. They called it Lila's Law. Local newspapers printed the headline in bold: Mother Sue's HOA fights for daughter's right to bloom. But not everyone applauded. 2 days later, I found red spray paint across the sidewalk again. This time it read, "Shut up or move out." But they didn't know me. Not anymore. The court ordered HOA discovery documents to be turned over. And inside them, something damning emerged. Emails, old ones, between Cartwright and 3 current board members. One, dated 2 months before the attack, let her keep planting for now. If she violates 3 or more sections, we can argue she's a disturbance and remove them both permanently. The smoking gun. Not just passive silence, but planned removal. A coordinated attack on a mother and her disabled child, executed through rules, fear, and timing. We added conspiracy to violate housing rights to the suit. The case went federal. Suddenly, they weren't calm anymore. They panicked. They offered a settlement. They offered an apology. They even offered to honor the garden. I refused. I didn't want their money. I wanted change. I wanted accountability. I wanted their names listed in court records for the next HOA president to read and never forget. The trial date was set for fall, but they didn't wait. 2 board members resigned. 3 homeowners publicly denounced the HOA. And 14 new gardens sprouted across the neighborhood, in front yards beside sidewalks, along fences, all of them legal now, thanks to a temporary injunction. One house even painted their mailbox with the words, "Still growing." And as for Lila, she spoke at the city council meeting, wearing a bright yellow dress, sitting in her wheelchair, her voice clear and steady. I just wanted to plant something. I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted flowers. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. And when we returned home that night, a surprise. Someone had placed a carved wooden sign in our flower bed, painted in gentle green. No one can uproot hope. 3 months later, Cartwright stood before a judge, not behind a podium. Her face had changed. No sun hat, no lipstick, just pale cheeks and clenched lips. Her lawyer tried to argue again that the shovel swing was accidental, a reaction to fear. That Cartwright had felt threatened by the presence of an unfamiliar child on common ground. But this time, the court had more than one video. We had audio. Mr. Elliott had found an old camcorder on his porch that had picked up the entire confrontation, including Cartwright's voice before the swing. "You little crippled brat. I told your mother." Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge didn't even pause. Guilty, sentencing, 9 months probation, 200 hours of community service, including a mandatory garden therapy program at a disability center. But the judge added something else. He ordered that Cartwright write a formal apology, not just to us, but to be posted publicly at the HOA bulletin board, along with a printed copy of Lila's original letter. That was the moment it truly ended, not with anger, but with public accountability. And the civil suit? We won. Not just in court, but everywhere. The HOA was fined, required to issue a public letter of policy revision, forced to undergo training on disability rights and abuse prevention, and most importantly, a binding legal agreement that Lila's garden would remain untouched. Permanently, the neighborhood changed. A new HOA president was elected, a quiet, kind man named Ravi Patel, who stopped by with his young daughter and said, "Lila's stronger than all of us. We're lucky to have her." He started a community beautification program, open to everyone, especially those with special needs. Lila was named the honorary chair. The garden? It grew, bigger, brighter, with benches donated by local veterans, with flowers labeled in Braille, with a wooden archway painted by school kids that read, "Lila's Garden of Strength." One afternoon in early spring, Lila wheeled out to the center of the garden and placed a single plant in the soil, a tall, golden marigold. She turned to me and said, "It's for the girl who was scared to come back out here." Then she smiled. I think she's gone now. Later that summer, a TV producer reached out. They wanted to turn Lila's story into a short film. We declined. It wasn't about cameras. It was about soil and roots and one girl's stubborn, beautiful belief that something good could grow even in the most hostile ground. Lila started walking again. Just a few steps. Not often. Not far. But enough. Enough to walk from our front door to the first sunflower in bloom. Enough to kneel one day, place her hand in the dirt and whisper, "Thank you," to every petal that stayed. And me? I stopped fearing letters. I stopped flinching at HOA envelopes. Because I knew no policy, no rule book, no cold smile behind a clipboard would ever erase what we built, what she planted. We still get letters from around the country, from parents, from kids, from survivors. They send drawings, seeds, poetry. One little girl from Ohio wrote, "Dear Lila, I'm scared of my neighborhood too, but I planted a flower for you. Now, I'm not scared anymore." The garden continues to grow, because hope, like roots, runs deep, and once it takes hold, it never lets go. 1 year later, the town changed, not in the way cities do with new roads or buildings, but in a softer, slower way, the kind that begins with people, then gardens, then hearts. Lila's garden still stands. No one questions it now. Tourists pass by and take photos. Children sit on the butterfly bench and read books. Elderly couples pause, hand in hand, watching bees dance around the lavender. A community that once sent us silent glares now waves from porches and leans down to touch the petals like blessings. Lila walks a little more each week. She no longer flinches at shovels. She teaches a local gardening class on Sundays, Flowers with Lila. Kids from all over come with tiny hands and muddy shoes and questions about sun and soil and hope. She tells them, "Don't be afraid to grow where people don't expect you to." As for me, I've stopped expecting life to be fair. But I do believe it can be fought for. That sometimes healing isn't just in hospitals or therapy rooms, but in gardens, in dirt, in standing your ground when the world tells you to stay quiet. The new mailbox is covered in vines now. The old one, the one Cartwright smashed, sits in the center of the garden, painted white filled with handwritten letters from kids who say, "Thank you. You helped me speak up. I planted something too." Sometimes Lila and I walk past the Cartwright house. It's still there, empty now, for sale, overgrown. But we don't slow down. We don't look back. We just walk toward the sunflowers, toward the garden, toward everything they try to take. And in case anyone ever forgets, a sign hangs at the front gate now, burned into reclaimed wood with gold foil lettering. It reads, "This is where she bloomed." If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, Don't just scroll past. Like this video to show that Lila's voice matters. Comment the word bloom to let the world know she's not alone. And most importantly, subscribe to HOA Denied Access for more real, emotional stories of everyday people standing up to injustice, one powerful fight at a time. Because in our neighborhood, they don't get the last word. We do.